right, welcome back to InCamp Whitetail Brief. This is your 20-minute episode where we just talk about deer and the things that revolve around it. And today I have my good buddy on, Mason Springer, and we're going to talk about the things that are around your whitetail season. What's up, buddy?
Well, Aaron, as you know, I just came off the hill. I was out putting out some cameras and different stuff. It was quite the sprint back down here to hop on the podcast, but we got it done.
It's no problem, man. Hey, I did it last night. I was a couple minutes late to one because I almost forgot. So all's well. So Mason, the reason that I wanted to have you on a Whitetail Brief episode is you are one of the only people that I am aware of that is a friend of mine that shoots archery competitively. So I feel like you're one of the most qualified people to talk about shot routine and what's important to you. So can you give like a little brief rundown of who you are and why you're qualified to talk about archery?
Yeah, so kind of starts with like my heritage, I guess. So actually behind me is my grandfather's bow. He wasn't much of a competitive archer, but he shot a little bit just in the backyard. When my dad was a kid, he picked up this bow and instantly fell in love with archery. So he started doing stuff competitively through high school into his 20s, and he competed at the national and world level. So he was really good. Then he kind of faded out of archery. He's always been an avid hunter and always will be. But he faded out of the competitive side of archery a little bit. And since we were born, me and my sister, and then just recently, probably 4 years ago now, I realized that I kind of needed to get into a sport. We were never much of a sport family, as far as like basketball, football, that type of stuff. And we were sitting around on the couch one day, and mom brought up the idea that we should get back into archery. And so that's what we did. Dad and I started going back into the local pro shop, shooting like league nights during the winter, spots, and I really got a love for archery then. So I started shooting, every week, start out with just a little kid's bow, and now I'm shooting, a big target bow with 30-inch stabilizers, the whole shebang. So I've been shooting for about 4 years now. I've competed at some of the world's largest events. I've competed at Vegas, Las Vegas, Nevada. That's the largest indoor tournament in the world. I've shot at the Lancaster Archery Classic. I've shot at several other national events, lots of different state events, local events. I'm always shooting my bow. Actually, I recently posted a video that I just got back from a school field trip, kind of, and I'd gone about 5 or 6 days without shooting my bow, which is the longest I've gone for many months, I'd say. But I'm always shooting. That's always where you can find me, is at the range.
See, this is Mason. This is why I had you on to talk about archery, because there's so many different thoughts about how you should have a routine for hunting or what's important, and I think that you can kind of shed some light on that. So when you're talking about, all right, so you were out of archery for 5 or 6 days. When you came back to it, did you forget anything?
So that's a good question. In the past, I'd say last fall, I probably had a 3-week break from archery, and it was somewhat purposeful. I thought it would be good for a kind of a hard reset because I had been grinding all summer and shooting a lot. And I think that at that time in my career, it was beneficial. I think that by the end of a long shooting season like that, I was starting to develop little bad habits, I'd say. And then with that 3-week span of not shooting, it kind of gave me a good hard reset. And I was able to focus in on my shot process and exactly what I was doing. So this time, after I'd say I've definitely improved my technique. I'm a lot more aware of what my technique is than I was last year. So when I came back from that 6-day break, I felt pretty good. I don't feel like a whole lot of stuff changed. I felt it was really cleansing to shoot, I'd say. It was kind of um, an interesting experience for me. That kind of reset, the little bit that it was kind of replenishing. It wasn't quite enough to harm me physically. I did notice somewhat of a difference, but it wasn't anything detrimental. I'd say it kind of had a neutral effect. I don't think it was good nor bad.
Yeah, I've actually come away from archery a couple times and felt like maybe I came back better because sometimes just a little bit of a break helps you to shake some bad habits that you might have developed towards the end of whatever you're shooting. So, if I'm let me get your perspective on this. Is there ever a time where you think that cycling is a good idea? Like maybe 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off. So you're shooting a whole bunch for those 3 weeks and then taking some time off in between.
Yeah, I think that for any archer that's not, at the competition level where you're constantly critiquing every little detail you can get your hands on.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really need that to be a bow hunter.
Right.
Um, However, when you're not critiquing those little tiny details all the time, inevitably you're gonna get bad habits. And I think that a reset could be good as long as you make sure you pick back up where you left off. So whether that's writing a note on your riser of what you did that week that made you shoot a little bit better. Maybe you pulled a little bit harder on your back wall or focused more on squeezing the trigger. Whatever it may have been, write that down before you take your break. That way you can pick back up with those good habits that you left off with and kind of forget about the bad ones, if that makes sense.
What I also want to know, Mason, is your shot process for hunting versus competitive shooting very different, or are you kind of just using your competitive shooting as a base and then translating it to a hunting scenario?
So I'm going to say yes, it's absolutely different. However, the fundamentals are the same. I think that archery is one of those things that once you get your fundamentals, and those might be different for every person, but once you get those, you probably won't change them very often. I know for me, I've got two distinct middle games on the competition side of things. So I run a different mental process for 3D archery and indoor archery, or any kind of spot shoot. So a lot of listeners are probably familiar with 3D archery. That's like foam deer targets. There's a variety of different species. Total Archery Challenge does this. ASA, IBO. There's lots of local shoots that do this type of shoot. It's kind of a more hunting style shot, I would say.
Yeah.
Um, and it requires a different mental process from a spot shoot, which is basically a ring target like the typical bullseye that you would see. You're just shooting that repetitively, whether that's 60 arrows in a row, 72 arrows in a row, and you're just like really trying to get in the groove. So it's a totally different mental game. Now, hunting, that's also going to be different from 3D because 3D, you've got all the time in the world, right? So 3D, you can take pretty much as long as you want on the stake. In a hunting situation, that's going to be totally different. So a lot of times you're going to have to make a shot quicker than what you're used to. And sometimes you're going to have to hold that shot back for a lot longer than you expected to. So it's going to be different for every form of archery. And I'll kind of give you a brief description of each. So for indoor archery, I'm basically trying to zone out. I'm
Okay.
focusing on very basic principles of shooting, whether that's pushing and pulling, squeezing the trigger, making sure that my posture is correct throughout the shot. And then 3D archery, I'm doing all of that while trying to deal with the variable of having a target that looks different each time.
Uh-huh.
So with a spot shoot where I'm shooting bullseyes, everything looks the exact same every time. The only
Uh-huh.
variable is like how much you're shaking. So I can really ignore what the pin is doing to a point. So I'll get in zombie mode basically when you're shooting 60 arrows, and I couldn't tell you what my pin was doing throughout that shot.
Uh-huh.
Now 3D, that's a different game. When you've got a different target every time, you have to focus on that target and make sure that you're putting the pin in the correct position on the target. And that requires focus on the pin movement, and you're going to remember what your pin did throughout that shot.
Right.
Then hunting, it's going to be really similar to 3D in that sense, but you're going to have to be able to vary your timing when you're hunting. So, practicing for a hunting shot, I will get my shot process down to its very basics. So, when I'm shooting target archery, I'm going to have a really long shot process. So, I'm going to keep track of every step, like grip the bow, raise the bow up, pull it back, come to anchor, place my nose on the string, look through the peep, like all these different steps. But for hunting, I'm going to limit that down to 2 or 3 steps. Draw the bow, anchor, push with my bow arm, and then pull with my back arm. So what is that? 4 steps, 3 steps, depending on how
Mm-hmm.
you look at it.
Right.
So that way I've got the ability to shorten that routine down and pull off a shot in 4 or 5 seconds, ideally. And also, you want to be able to make sure that that process is compatible with a longer shot too. So if you have to hold that bow back for 15 seconds, especially if you're in a tree stand, uphill, downhill shots,
Mm-hmm.
your form's probably going to break down a little bit. Your front shoulder might start to come up, and you might start to drift out of your peep a little bit. Weird things can happen when you're holding the bow back for a long time. And having a good mental process that's kind of repetitive in your head, like maybe you're saying hold, 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 hold. Something like that can kind of keep you in line when you're holding the bow back for long periods of time. But I mean, that's kind of my shot process, and it's going to be different for everybody.
So when it comes in the hunting scenario, I like your thought of making it simple because you kind of have to. Like you said, it might be a deer runs in, you got to shoot it like now, you know? So everything when you talk about becoming, well, a lot of stuff you read about becoming a better archer, you're talking about like pin flow and aiming versus holding on a target. That I don't I don't know a whole lot of archery terms very well. I think that I'm a command shooter maybe because I can put a pin on a little teeny tiny thing on the target and hold it there. If I float that pin, I miss every time. So I guess in a hunting scenario, I think it's important to do the like aim small, miss small thing or whatever, where you're kind of picking a hair. But what's your process for aiming? Your process for making a shot and your shot process is excellent. So what's your tips on aiming when you're talking about an animal?
Yeah, so I think aiming on an animal like a whitetail, there's a lot of variables going through your head, right? You're looking at where the position of the deer's legs are. You're looking
Mm-hmm.
at, I mean, there's so many different variables. I could ramble on. But I think it's important to pick a point on the deer's hide.
Yeah.
Um, and aim small, miss small, like you said. I think that's very important. I do that with every form of archery. I'm trying to like on a 3D target, I kind of pick a spot. Maybe there's a shadow on the target, and translating this over to a whitetail, maybe there's a little spot in the hide, or you can see the crease of the armpit. Whatever it is, I like to pick a spot and just like burn a hole in it with my eyes. So I'm like
Mm-hmm.
really focusing on that one point and trying to put my pin there. Now, when you're doing that, pin float becomes an issue, right? Especially if you held the bow back for a long time. I
Mm-hmm.
think that if you're starting to execute the shot, whether you're making a quick shot and you're starting to execute as soon as you get back to full draw,
Mm-hmm.
or you're holding it for a little bit and then starting to execute, I think it's important to push and pull. Make sure that you're expanding throughout that shot. And if you're burning a hole in that target and expanding throughout that shot, it's going to be a lot easier to hold the pin on that spot consistently. And at least that's how it's been in my experience and several others I've talked to.
Yeah.
But aiming is kind of complicated. You can get in depth on like stabilizers and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even run stabilizers on some of my hunting setups. I think
Okay.
that form is the most important thing when you're trying to hold steady. But yeah, as far as that goes, aiming, it's one of those things that just takes repetition, I think. Practice in the backyard or wherever you practice.
For the average archery hunter, how much practice do you think they need to be proficient in the woods?
So that's a really good question. I know that when I first started out, I kind of noticed that I had to shoot 3 times a week to maintain where I was at. So if I shot 3 times per week, every Tuesday when we go into the bow shop and shoot around, I would pretty much keep my scores the same week for week. If I shot 4 days a week in practice, then I would start upping my scores a little bit each week. I tended to get better. 5 days, I'd get even better quicker. So for me, 3 days a week was sufficient. I'd say 4 days would be ideal. For the average bow hunter, I think that it would be important to practice shooting at least once a month throughout the entire year. And then once you're closing into that month and a half mark to hunting season, whether that's whitetail, elk,
Mm-hmm.
I'd say that you'd want to be shooting at that 3, 4, maybe even 5 day a week mark. I know that, I mean, so many people spend so much time putting themselves in front of an animal, but when the time comes to make that shot, that's where a lot of hunters kind of fall short, is that shot. I think that the shot is just as or more important than the other types of preparation.
Yeah, I agree. So for the archer that is practicing for hunting an animal, what are a few things you can give them to add into their practice, whether it be um, the angle of shot you're taking, the position you're shooting from, things like that?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing for bow hunters is shot placement. I think that there are a ton of bow hunters. I know that there are a ton of bow hunters that aren't completely confident in shot placement, whether the deer's
Mm-hmm.
quartered away slightly, whether it's shooting down out of a tree stand, you have to aim a little bit higher on the side of the deer. I think that practicing shot placement is very important. That could
Mm-hmm.
be getting a ladder, climbing up on your roof, and practicing down angled shots on deer, learning where to aim, where the vitals are, practicing a quartering away shot, a broadside shot, whatever that shot might be. I think it's very important to practice shot placement and learning the anatomy of a deer, right? You have to miss certain bones in the shoulder with a bow, or your
Mm-hmm.
chances of making a clean kill go way down. Um, I think that as far as positioning, it's very important to practice for those unexpected shots. I think that if you're practicing in your backyard and you're just shooting, 20 yards broadside at a rubber deer, I think that that is a very small part of the shot itself. I think that
Yep.
it is more important to practice those goofy shots that you weren't expecting. I mean, I don't know if I've ever had a ideal shot at an animal. I mean, it has always been some sort of wacky situation I never would have thought I'd gotten into.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, like, shooting out of a chair, mimicking shooting out of a tree stand, whatever it is, I mean, try to brainstorm all the different situations you think you might run into and practice those. That way, when the time comes, you're ready.
Yeah, I hear it. I hear it, dude. So, Mason, the time has come. We're going to hop on your podcast here in just a second. But just in summary, we talked about all the things you can do to become a more proficient archer. We talked about form. We talked about different things you can do to add to your archery practice. We talked about things that are important to a competitive archer and to a archer in the whitetail woods. So, Mason, thanks for coming on, dude. It's been great.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it, Aaron.